Hello and welcome to the 100th episode of the Retirement Café podcast. What a milestone. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, you will know that we're sponsored by My Financial Planner. Not knowing when you can afford to retire or what your pensions will provide can be worrying. My Financial Planner provides independent, fixed-fee retirement planning advice, bringing clarity to your financial future. At My Financial Planner, we build a financial plan for your retirement and equip you with the knowledge to implement the plan and buy any products you need yourself. Find out more about getting a plan to fund the retirement you really want at myfinancialplanner.co.uk. I'm so excited to have reached the 100th episode of the podcast. When I first had the idea of converting our live Retirement Cafe events into a podcast format to be able to reach more people, podcasting really wasn't that popular. But in the past 18 months has seen a massive boon in podcasting with such a wide array of shows to choose from that I want to thank you for choosing to listen to this one. I was keen to mark the 100th episode with a related topic and a very special guest. It didn't take long to realize there was no one better suited than the co-author of a book that has received critical acclaim across the world and one that I'm sure many of you will have read. The 100-Year Life, Living and Working in an Age of Longevity. I feel honoured to have the opportunity to chat with Professor Andrew J. Scott recently and to share our conversation with you today. Andrew is Professor of Economics at London Business School and a consulting scholar at Stanford University's Centre of Longevity. He is recognised as a world-leading authority on longevity, co-author of 2 groundbreaking books that have been taking the world by storm, government advisor and the founder of the Longevity Forum. In our conversation, Professor Scott shares why he sees greater life expectancy as a gift and not a curse, and how his books paint a positive framework for aging. Importantly, he also suggests steps we can all take to make the most of our longer lives. In addition to the 100-Year Life, Professor Scott co-authored The New Long Life, also with Professor Lynda Gratton, which was released earlier this year. I love chatting with Professor Scott, so I really hope you enjoy our conversation. So, welcome to the podcast, Professor Andrew Scott.
Hi, Justin. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thanks for having me.
Well, I've been really looking forward to this, Professor Scott. I'm a follower of your work, and I've read both of your, well, I'm not sure, you may have written more than this, but I've read The New Long Life. This is your new book, and The 100-Year Life, which came out a few years ago. It's fantastic, and I got lots of questions to ask you a little bit about that. But other than being a well-published author, can you give me a little bit an idea, and our listeners, who you are and what your background is?
Oh, interesting one. Yeah. So, I'm an academic, have been most of my life. I'm a Londoner originally. I've taught at Oxford, Harvard, and for the last a long time now, London Business School. I'm a macroeconomist, so I tend to focus on the big picture stuff. And the big picture stuff, I guess, there's 2 types. There's the short term, what's going to happen to interest rates, exchange rates, GDP. And then there's the long run stuff, the sort of trends that change the world around us. And at the business school, I focus on both. For the first part of my career, I was a very big focus on monetary policy and fiscal policy, advising various central banks and governments, and was on the board of the FSA after the last financial crisis. But increasingly, my focus is on longevity because I think it's a wonderfully broad and incredibly important topic. So one of the great achievements of the 20th century was this fantastic increase in life expectancy, which I don't think we've yet seized the key opportunities for.
No. So what got you particularly interested? I mean, I'm sure as an economist, you could have gone in lots of different directions. So what got you particularly interested in this?
Well, I do love longevity because it's a really broad topic that involves not just economics, but sort of history, philosophy. So I kind of have a weakness for topics like that. But explicitly it came from, I would give a lecture course at London Business School called World Economy, Problems and Prospects. Right now, there's a bit more of the problems than the prospects, I think. But and part of that would be about what's happening in the US. But you'd look at these longer run trends like sustainability, technology. And I would give a lecture on the aging society. And I just found it a really frustrating lecture after a while because the aging society story, you're probably familiar with, I was learning it as undergraduate, which is at least 30 years ago. There's just a change in the birth rate, which is falling. People are living for longer. There's more old people. And basically, this is a problem because this story says, well, there's more old people, they're not productive, they get ill, they're a burden on society. And this is going to be a major problem going forward. And I had two frustrations with that. The first was it was really negative and a kind of what I would call a spreadsheet mentality. It would just say, if we just project current trends, this will happen. And economics is actually very good on looking at interactions and how things change. So there wasn't much of that. But the second thing that really puzzled me was that it's all based around this key statistic that on average, we're living longer and we're healthier for longer, which sounds like brilliant news to me. So how do you take that individual starting point? And I stress averages. Averages can be very misleading. But how do you take that starting point and turn it into a negative story? And that was kind of the beginnings of thinking of the 100-year life, because you start thinking, oh, well, actually, sure, there's more old people, but how our aging is changing. And that age is kind of malleable and we need to think about a new map of life and changing what we do. So that was kind of how I got into it, from this very negative story about an aging society, which is very real. I mean, there are a lot of older people. In countries like Japan, there's a huge number of older people, and that does have risks of dementia and care homes, all of which are very, very real problems. But it's an incomplete picture because on average, we're living longer and we're aging better. So that's like, oh, wow, there's two things: more old people, how our aging is changing. Let's focus on that second one, because then we really do get the benefits of longer, healthier lives.
Yeah, yeah. So in your book, The 100-Year Life, The Living and Working in an Age of Longevity, this crucial kind of aspect of I think I talk to a lot of people, as we mentioned before we started talking online, but I advise people who are kind of entering or just starting their retirements, and they're classically 55 to 65. And I don't think they, I run my timelines and my cash flow forecasts, etc., to 100. And they look at me and like, yeah, whatever. It ain't going to happen, because, of course, there's a possibly what we're both familiar with, probably a kind of recency bias of they're looking at their mums and dads. Totally. And they're going, well, my mum and dad didn't make 100, so why should I? And I might have a bit of blood pressure and I might have had some heart problems and a stent or something, there may be some kind of stuff that's gone on. So they don't think, even the 65-year-olds now think they're going to hit 95. But of course, they've got a big chance, haven't they?
Yes. And of course, here there's a big debate going on, but absolutely. And your point about people being unaware of the chances of living into 90 or even 100. The number of people aged over 100 is the fastest growing demographic group. And it's very real. And I think that, as you say, when I ask people what they think their life expectancy is going to be in the sort of classroom, it's interesting. Only about a third of people say they've even thought about it, which is kind of interesting, but I kind of get that. And then those who do, I say, well, where do you get the information from? And it's either looking at their grandparents or their parents, which, as you say, is wrong, because every generation has, at least, the last 100 years, been living about 6 to 9 years longer than the past. So you're going to live beyond what your parents, your grandparents did on average. And the other thing is the government life expectancy stats kind of assume that trend doesn't hold. So they kind of assume that a child born today in 2020 lives their whole life in 2020, which is wrong, because by the time a child today is 60, technology will have moved on. So they're kind of underestimating life expectancy. And I think that's a real challenge, because I think twofold. The first is, for most of the 20th century, life insurance was a key financial issue, because you worried about dying young. Yeah. And so you want to make sure your family were looked after. The really big issue now is longevity insurance, which is I will outlive my assets, my relationship, my sense of purpose. And that's really what these life expectancy stats are telling us. And then the other thing, which I think is great that you're touching into this, it's I said age is malleable. So actually what you find is that, of course, illnesses happen, genetic issues occur, and the environment matters. But there's a lot of things you can do that affect how you age. Not just your diet, but how engaged you are. Do you have a sense of purpose when you get up in the morning? So it's also not beyond your control. And I think that's really important for this planning.
Yeah, yeah. And there must be, we'll come to the new long life, which I've got a lot of questions about your new book, but thinking about your work with governments and regulators and etc. I'm always challenged about around politics about short-termism, i.e., we're looking at what's going on in the next couple of years. How do we get voted in again? And this is a problem this is a societal problem, and it's a bit like we want to plan way ahead to make sure that we've got the services and the kind of the systems, etc., available for this increased population of the over 80s, so that they can have a prosperous, fulfilling, purposeful life in that latter stage of their life. So how do you would that be a frustration of yours when you talk to governments about, hold on guys, we've got to, this is a wave of people coming through, we've got to make societal changeover?
No, it is, and government's kind of weirdly schizophrenic, because at one level they're obsessed with what's happening on Monday, but they're also quite happy to make changes that affect 50 years ahead. It's a bit in between that's the real problem, right. Because they change the pension entitlement rules way ahead of time. So in 50 years' time, you'll be affected. So no one kind of complains or takes any notice of it now. So they do some long-term thinking. But I think it's interesting just looking at COVID, which of course is this awful pandemic, but it's like a viral attack of aging. If you look at the mortality rate from COVID, and it's revealed very clearly which societies are well equipped to deal with an aging society. And sadly, the UK and US haven't done terribly well, whereas other countries like Japan have. And, the example of care homes would show how unprepared we are. So yes, it is a frustration. The bigger frustration I have is actually, for everyone thinking about how we age and trying to influence it and aging differently is a big shock to the system. We're quite messed up around our concept of age. What we consider to be old and what people should be doing when they're old is really pinned down by really quite out-of-date assumptions. And so I think the biggest challenge is trying to get people to really free their mind and recognize that aging is different in two ways. And it comes back to that malleability of age, the way that you can influence how you age, which is why we are living longer and healthier for longer. And that malleability requires a very different mindset, because you've got to start thinking more about your future because you've got more of it. And you've got to work to try and improve that future, which isn't just about your financial savings. And that requires a very different way of thinking. So whereas most governments just say 65 plus is old, that's kind of no longer the case, because first of all, people are aging better. So 70 is the new 65, or whatever number you want to talk about. But the other thing that's really important is diversity. People age very differently. And dealing with that, I think, is my biggest frustration. So we have these out-of-date stereotypes about aging. And we have it at an individual level as well. We look back to what our grandparents did or our parents and say that's what it is to be old. But when the Rolling Stones are something like 10 years older than the US Supreme Court, we need to sort of think about our stereotypes a little bit differently.
Absolutely. And I think you a couple of times you talk about in the new long life, you talk about social ingenuity and being social pioneers. Yeah. And I've been thinking about this a little bit, and thinking about, when we set out in our 20s for a career, that we may have got an academic qualification, and then we set out kind of climbing a mountain, and it's the classic dichotomy. Of course, you climb the mountain, you do really well, you get to the top of the mountain, you possibly realize it was the wrong mountain you've been climbing, and then you look below, and then you look to the next thing to do. But I wonder whether we need to reshift it and go, actually, I'm 20, I've got another 80 years to live. What is it that I want to learn and be skilled at and to provide value in the world over 80 odd years? Yeah. And instead of this idea that I'm going to work my socks off until I'm 65 and then I've just got to go on, and then I can go on holiday.
Totally.
that maybe there's some kind of, there's some kind of balance in here that actually the working week of 5 days a week. And, we all know that, I know that every client of mine who earns what very handsome wages, they do sell their soul. They don't get that for 1 day a week.
Totally. No, absolutely.
There's a 60, 70 hour week coming in, and of stress and of hassle and not time to see the kids and not, and not, working on holiday, picking up emails, a kind of stressed life. When you think, hold on, is there a proper, because often enough they're funding paying a mortgage off over 25 years. Well, that could be done over 50.
Yeah.
They're funding a retirement that they're planning to, we've got to get enough in the pot to pay for our retirement at 65. Well, who says, why couldn't you just, my old boss I had lunch with him the other day, and he's in his 80s. And he's loving it still. He's running a brokerage. He's still got 20 staff. He says, I go home at lunchtime now, but I'm still in at 8 o'clock, and it keeps me alive.
No, and that's, I mean, there's so many great things in what you said there to unpack, but, certainly I think with this longer life, one of the questions is, how do I keep a sense of active purpose going? And that's maybe paid work, but it may not be. There's lots of other ways of doing it. But if it is long life, you want to make sure that you feel good waking up every morning. And that's not just about your health. It's about having a sense of purpose. And study after study shows that does help prolong life and happiness as well. But yeah, I mean, the 100-year life, the starting point for me was, well, we keep thinking about we've got more old people, but actually, if people are aging better, the real implication is we've got more time. And the question is, what do you want to do with that time?
Yeah.
And what you can't do is just follow in the footsteps of what your parents did, because you've got a longer life to plan for. And then how do you make best use of that time? And do you borrow some of it in your 30s from when you're 70? And do you borrow some in your 50s? Because we had different push points. And then you realize that time is a social convention. We invent stages of life. And in the 20th century, we invented teenagers, which didn't exist before the 20th century. We had children and adults, and we invented teenagers. And we invented retirement. And retirement was a pretty small window, but a lovely one, because everyone with an advent of a pension suddenly had a period in life where they were financially secure to some extent.
Yeah.
But then we've got to develop whole new stages of life if we're living to 90 or 100 rather than 70. And part of that, I think you're seeing, is adult development is extending. So if you had children, then you had teenagers, you're now seeing something in their 20s, which I think you're spot on. It's like, well, actually, who am I and what do I stand for? It's about actually not committing and just getting on, but saying, well, it's a long race ahead. What do I value most? And, how do I know who I am? Which I think is one reason, by the way, things like divorce rates are falling, because if you marry later rather than earlier, which is clearly happening, and I think that's connected to longer lives, you kind of know yourself and how to deal with things better. But it's not just in the 20s. You've also got people in retirement where, it used to be 5 or 6 years. Now it could be 25, 30 years. And you can clearly see retirement being reinvented at whole new stages itself. The first one, often, I'm still working. I've got another job. I haven't actually retired. And then there's all sorts of things happening in 40s and 50s where people think, wow, if I'm going to have to work till I'm 70, if you're in your mid 40s and you're working till you're 70, you've got more work ahead of you than you've done already, probably. And that's a sobering thought for many people. So there's kind of a rejuvenation going through, but that's all pioneering as we try and find out how to make use of all this extra time and what's the way to do.
And you touch on in the book about, I quite like the truck driver the American truck driver who's going to lose his job to driverless cars. I think you talk about maybe in Arizona that they're already testing these vehicles, and so there's that is the economic aspect, of course, is that, okay, well, I'm quite happy to do purposeful work up until I'm relatively old, but I want a job. I want a job to be able to do. And if it's all been roboed, what will I be able to do? I've got some thoughts around that, but what are yours? I mean, what does someone who's maybe sat with those thoughts, what would you advise them to do?
So someone in their 50s, what's going to happen? What jobs will be available?
Yeah. Yeah, and if they are the truck driver, as you've got, is going, well, I'm not sure. And also there is a physical capacity element to this as well, isn't there? As we know that as we get older, that we don't maybe have the robustness to do a physical job. I mean, as a financial advisor, I might be easily here till I'm 85, but if I'm a truck driver, that might be more challenging.
No, I mean, and this, of course, is where. What I think is interesting, and it comes out this diversity of age, is that once you start to understand that, you recognize that people aged over 50 or 65, they're not a homogenous group. No. No firm would say, oh, my under 50s, they're a single market. They're just people, and people have all sorts of different needs, and perhaps the diversity gets bigger as you age, because you can be running 100 meters aged 100, and you can go on YouTube and see it, or you can be in a wheelchair at 50. So the diversity gets greater, but people are people, and to try and sort of make simpler assumptions, I think, is hard. And certainly, anyone with the physical job, there will be limitations, although as we age better, you can work for longer. The other thing is the robots actually are supporting people in manufacturing tends to have quite old workers, and robots are really helping there because they're doing a lot of the difficult physical work. So I think, in terms of what jobs, let me just backtrack a little bit and say one of the things that I'm really concerned about is people in their sort of early to mid 50s who are starting to think, and that's where I am, I'm 55. They're looking ahead to when they may retire, and people have got different dates for that one. But they sort of assume, well, I can carry on doing what I'm doing now and everything will be fine. If you look at the labour market, and not just in COVID times, but all the time, people start to withdraw from the labour market after 50. And some of that is early retirement, but not much. Some of it is ill health, which of course is never a choice. And some of it is you just get kicked out of your job and people don't see it coming. And now, I think what is really needed in that 50 to 55 age group is not necessarily a paranoia, but a sense that actually I may have to change. And the change could be a choice because I'm just fed up doing what I'm doing. It could be forced upon you, but you need to think I'm going to have to be flexible enough to adapt. And that's about a mindset and skills and your sense of identity. So I think that's a really important thing. And, previously you didn't have to reinvent yourself at 50. Mark Friedman, who runs a wonderful organization called Encore in the US, says we don't have a midlife crisis, we have a midlife chasm that doesn't support reinvention in middle age. Teenagers, they're all about reinvention. There's a whole culture around that. We kind of need to do the same in the 50s. And, if you are unfortunate enough to lose your job, or you want to think about ensuring your job, being open and putting yourself into situations where you're no longer the experienced, knowledgeable person, but actually you may know nothing or anyone, is really important. And that ability to deal with transitions is really important. What to do to defend your job? I mean, there's upskilling and there's reskilling. So upskilling is, learning database stuff, AI and robotics and coding, so that you'll be able to change your job when these technologies come in. The other thing is that, what we're going to see as machines become more machine-like is actually humans need to become more human-like. And so I think the big areas of jobs will be ones where human skills come to the fore. And actually, I think that might be quite good for older people because the evidence tend to suggest that, over time, your brain shifts what it's best at, and sort of empathy, leadership, creating teams together tends to be a skill that gets stronger as you get older. Again, that's a vast stereotype, but I think that's kind of the area to focus on. I think you need to be able to be comfortable using technology, but I certainly wouldn't advise everyone trying to become full stack developers in their 50s.
No. You go on into the book about you mentioned educational institutions and corporates have a role to play. And our concern, though, is their insights will be partial and biased, thus opening up an important role for governments. They can fulfill this role by collecting data from a variety of sources and stakeholders, etc. But you then go on to say the German Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs has done this through a 2-year multi-stakeholder dialogue about 2030 future of work. So, the Germans are obviously, taking a view here and going, okay, so we actually need to do something to help the population as they face these challenges. Is this something that the UK will look at?
I think so. I mean, obviously, different countries have different preferences about how they deliver things, and some do it more through the market, some through government, and all of that is going to depend upon how strong the markets are and the governments. I think on education, though, we have to see a government response. So the theme of the new long life is we've got this longevity. So we have to have a new map of life about what we do at different stages in life, and that's going to change our working careers. And then there's AI and robotics coming along, which is going to change what we do at work. It's going to reconfigure the skills we need at work, even if we keep our job. And it also may lead you to change your job because you become redundant and need new roles. And putting those two together, that's a massive change in what we think about work and career. It's going to be a much more fragmented, disjointed, fluid one, which is going to require you changing your skills as you go along. And some of that will be about, I need to know technology, but some of it will just be, I've got a new job, I need to learn new skills. And, that is a pretty fundamental rewiring of work, careers, and home, which is akin to what happened in the Industrial Revolution. And those big changes require some form of government support and system. So Industrial Revolution, we saw a massive expansion of state education at end of primary school and beyond. So there has to be something state-led. And I think you are seeing a number of countries, in the UK included, beginning to revert back to industrial policy. Look at all the discussions around Brexit now. It's sort of about the UK's desire to have the ability to target certain sectors. So I think you are seeing everywhere in different ways that sense of, these are the industries of the future, this is what the skills we need. And then it'll be a question of tying it all together. My only caveat on that, I think on education, what is going to be really important is learning how to learn and being open-minded, which kind of also means about unlearning. So we're going to have to sort of have those basic skills, and then in addition, there may be certain technical skills you have to learn. And I think some of that is going to be, a lot of it's going to have to be around adult education. And I think that's going to be done in lots of different ways other than just going to a college or a university. There'll be online courses, there'll be local groups, community colleges, etc., all of which I think will play a really important role.
Yeah, yeah. You have kind of a little framework of rate, explore, relate, and can you tell me more about that and how? Because I want our listeners to maybe to be sitting there thinking, okay, well, I may be 50 odd. I am feeling under pressure. Maybe, I'm not sure how secure my job is, and oh my God, this whole thing about I've got to go and reskill myself, and I haven't been back to school for a long time. And, it's all sounding a little like hard work whereas I think we can flip it around a little bit, but maybe you could explain how your framework works.
Yeah. So it's tricky, isn't it? Because the old ways are not working so well. We know pensions are struggling because, retirement needs to increase. That means employment struggles because, how do I keep the skills? So all our old ways are no longer supporting the life that we want as we live longer and as jobs change. And that's a system change. And, it's much easier for us as individuals just to go along doing what we've always done. But so much of these changes put a responsibility on you. And of course, that's a bit daunting, particularly if you haven't got a roadmap of what to do. The great thing about social norms is they say this tends to work, you should do it. You imagine being 15 and having no idea how to live your life and being told, right, design a life, of course. So we copy what happens before. And suddenly with these deep-seated changes that are coming, we can't copy what happened before. So we need to look around at what others are doing and we need to take responsibility. And because you have more future, so you need to invest more in your future, whether you're 90 or 50 or 20, everyone now has more future ahead of them because of this life expectancy trend. And that's daunting, but it can also be exciting as well. And, I think for me, the narrate, explore, relate framework was to try and bring together so many different strands, because of course life is about many, many things. But the tendency, I think, when you talk about an aging society or people living longer is, so what about my finances? How do I make it work? And I'm an economist. I know that's important, but actually that's the wrong way of looking at things, because your finances should support the life you want rather than your life support the finances you need. And the most important thing is that you have a good life. So with this longer life and with this technology coming along, how do we use it to improve things? And that's where the narrate, explore, relate comes from. So narrate is a whole bunch of things that are really around two things. One is rethinking your concept of age and old and what you do, because you've got more future, you've got to invest in your future self more and do things differently. But then it's recognizing that it's your story to paint because of this innovation. And it's like to have more stages and transitions, but how do you create them and how do you connect them together so it's your story and what you want to do? So that's the narrate stuff. The explore is that, there's no simple answers. You've got to go out and actually be open-minded and investigate change. And I think that's the hard one, because, the explore is about going out and finding out, well, what do I want to do? What's out there? And then once you see what's out there, having the confidence to start to make changes. Now, it's not about just throwing everything up in the air and saying, I've got to trash everything and start again. But you will have to evolve and change for the longer future. So what do you want to do and how do you find out about it? And change is a complicated process because we have a sense of identity that may be pinned around the job I do and where I report to work and what I've done for the last 20, 25 years. And for many people, myself included, just moving away from that is hard. But Explore says, put yourself in situations where you're going to grow, change. I won't say augment, but just be comfortable with no longer being that person who knows who they are. So if I go in a room and I'm known as an economics professor, but you're going to have to put yourself in a room where actually no one cares if you're an economics professor. No one's going to ask you any economic advice. And suddenly, you feel a little bit denuded, but that's the process of change that's required. And then the relate is really, fitting everything together because, we know from all the life studies that money makes you happier. It just doesn't make you happy. And the most important things in life are relationships. But if you are changing what you do and going through these transitions, what are the relationships you need to focus on and how do you work on them? And for me, I think there's two particularly interesting ones there. One is intergenerational, because as we live longer and there's fewer children, intergenerational relationships, whether it be in the work or in the family, get really important. So working on those, I think, we've got more and more 4-generation households, for instance, and probably 5-generation households. So we need to work on that. And if you're young, when I was young and I go to family parties, there were loads of youngsters. Now there's just as many old people. So the intergenerational stuff becomes more important. And then work is interesting because if you're no longer at one job or 2 jobs over your career, then actually your local network becomes more important compared to your work network. And just think about COVID, where everyone is home working right now. Suddenly your work environment is less important for relationships. It's your internal household and your local community that become more important. And I think, they're 2 key aspects to work on.
Yeah. And so how do you, you gave your age away a little earlier. How do you view your next 50 years?
Well, I'm kind of lucky as an academic because it's sort of got a bit of flexibility built into it. Well, I hope so anyway. So, in some ways I'm living a multi-stage life because I've just switched my intellectual interests, which as an academic is a bit akin to starting a new job. So I'm very excited about this longevity. I'm doing some deep academic research, which I hope will feed into policy. I'm also trying to get individuals to understand. I run an organization called the Longevity Forum, which is trying to push this agenda that as well as an aging society, we really have to focus on aging as well as we possibly can. So I've got a kind of a new mission and a new zest of life. And of course, in doing all of that, it makes you think, how do I manage my future? I'm an economist. I've always sort of been doing the financial calculations, but for me, it is much more than thinking about my health and my engagement and making sure that I keep moving. I've got various long-term football injuries, etc. So making sure that I work on those now, so that I hopefully benefit from that later on. Watching what I eat, which is always a challenge, and what I drink, but also particularly engagement, because just recognizing that, I probably will have, hopefully, more life ahead of me than my parents and my grandparents, which means, how do I make sure I keep happy and motivated? And you can't be too prescriptive about that, because I'm 55. I don't know what I want to do when I'm 85, but creating options and flexibility seem important in it.
Yeah.
And that takes time. That's not about committing to work, as you were saying, those long hours. I mean, I do work a lot, but there's a, in the new long life, we talk about a different concept of work. Work in the 20th century became the time I get paid for from my employer. But actually, I think there's a whole bunch of leisure activities, which in a way are work. They're things you do which pay a return later. And it could be relationships, it could be your health, it could be your skills. But actually thinking consciously about leisure, and not being a control freak and saying, meeting my children to have a good relationship with them, but actually being aware that right now, the best investment of my time isn't necessarily just working.
No. And I think maybe a reflection of thinking, well, let's just imagine that I do get to 90 and I'm looking back to the decisions I made when I was 55, and go, okay, so what would those decisions be? What were the new skills that I could have learned in those years? What are the relationships I could have had? What are the places that I could have traveled to do? What are the social aspects of the community work that I got involved in? And looking at all those aspects, and then kind of working backwards and go, okay, well, my 90-year-old self is going to thank me for the decisions I made at 55. The decisions I made around my health, the decisions, a little bit, I suppose, a bit like my 90-year-old self will thank my 55-year-old self for not drinking a bottle of wine every night, because what is it? There is a flip side. I mean, there's a lot that I can sense that we can view this as a bit of a negative, but you then go, hold on. If you do make the right decisions or try and look after your health, there's a good chance you can get to 90 and still be really, I still know some really fit people at that age who are still got purposeful lives. They're enjoying, work, some kind of work, they're paid work, consultancy, that type of thing. They've got an active community and they've got great relationships with their family. You kind of go, what's not to like about that?
No, I agree. I think it's interesting, and I don't want to be too simplistic here, but if the thought of, ill health, let's put that on one side for now, but if the thought of a long life is depressing, then it suggests that something needs to happen today to avoid that, because it shouldn't be. And that may sound very Pollyannish, but that's kind of my starting point. And then, obviously you want the future to be as well as possible, which then is about investing in that future. And, the forward-looking nature of this is crucial. And there's a recursivity as well, which I think you hit upon, which is that what I do now in my 50s will influence what I can do in my 60s, which will influence what I can do in my 70s. And the skill that has become more important is being able to relate to your future self, because you've got more future selves. And working on that way of thinking is incredibly important. And, we've got to look on the flip side of this, is that, life expectancy has increased. Not all the years are good ones. On average, the years of life that are spent in good health has remained constant. So you've got more years of good health, but you've got more years of bad health. And you want to, of course, minimize that period of ill health at the end. And not all of that is under your control, but some of it is. And, that to me is, we haven't got rid of the end of life, but we have kind of inserted this period at the end of late middle age. That's really what's happened. And, most people assume that this living longer is about more years right at the end where we're ill, but actually it's not. I say it's really this period sort of 50 to 70 that's kind of been reinvented. And that can be a great opportunity, but it does require work. And the good news is, no matter what age you are, 50, 60, 70 or 80 or even 90, if you do something now, you do affect the future. Of course, the earlier you start, the better. But that's an incredibly important skill. So working on trying to be kind to your future self is, a new life skill.
Wise words, wise words. Well, thank you so much, Professor Scott. It's been fascinating talking to you. Where can people find out more about you and the great work that you do?
Obviously there's the 2 books, which New Long Life is just out, and the 100-Year Life, the global bestseller, came out in 2016. And we'll no doubt put on the website the details of my website and my Twitter, where you can see me trying to spread the word and communicate research that I'm doing. And then do check out the longevityforum.com, which is also trying to put this agenda together, looking at what's happening in the science, which is really interesting. I mean, the scientists are beginning to make progress in understanding how we age and even reversing it in the case of non-humans. So there's, huge issues there about how we can make age more malleable. So there's a few places to go to.
Amazing, amazing. Well, we will put all of those links in the show notes. Once again, thank you for your time. Really, really enjoyed chatting to you, and I wish you all the best with your great work.
Thank you, Justin. Been fun.
So until next time, this is Justin King helping you feel more informed in your retirement.